In this segment, I invite you to reflect on power distance and preaching. Culture is created, shaped, transmitted, and learned through communication. The reverse is also the case. That is, communication practices are largely created, shaped, and transmitted by culture. As a communicative event, preaching is inextricably embedded in culture. Different dimensions of culture influence preaching practices to different degrees. As a cultural value that deals with an authoritative text and authoritative speech, power distance plays a key role to understand different cultural views of preaching. Different perceptions of authority deeply influence how preachers see themselves, how they speak, how they act, as well as how people listen and people's expectations on the preacher and on the sermon, including if you are allowed to express any disagreement with your pastor's interpretation. Religious beliefs and different ways religious institutions are organized have a deep influence in cultural values and vice versa. Europe is a good example of the influence of religion on power distance. Countries with a Protestant majority, or which have been largely influenced by Protestantism, tend to be more egalitarian than those in the Roman Catholic tradition. On the other hand, power distance may also be related to religious preferences and the way religion operates in a certain country. In an interesting study on the growth of evangelical Christianity, Rawson and Fields argue that this form of Christianity, evangelical Christianity and Pentecostalism in particular, is growing in countries with high power distance cultures. In addition to national culture's perspective, social class provides other frame to understand power distance, authority, and privilege in certain societies or subgroups and their influence on preaching. In their book, Preaching to Every Pew, Neiman and Roger claim that in various parts of the world today, economy is the social criteria for hierarchy. People from different social classes have different views of authority, which have repercussion on the pastoral authority of the preachers and the scriptures. Pastoral authority is influenced by different cultural perceptions of authority and how small or large is the distance between regular people in the pews and the preacher. This perceived gap has implications on trust, which is indispensable for preaching. Trust is built on meeting expectations. In their survey, Neiman and Rogers identify 3 areas of preaching expectations: the view of the preacher, the use of the scripture, and the sermon itself. In certain cultures, age is an important authority factor. Younger preachers may be still granted authority if they bear the confidence and maturity one would find with an older person. In low power distance cultures, women preachers are granted the same or very similar authority than male preachers, which is less likely to happen in hierarchical societies. In most cases, hierarchical societies are also patriarchal. People from all cultures value consistency between speech and behavior, but in high power distance cultures, where authority figures are considered existentially unequal, expectations are higher. Even though authority figures receive a deferential treatment, in high power distance culture, there may be also distrust on authority, which increases the expectations on the preacher's ethics in the Christian community context. Somehow, the preacher becomes part of the text, and the credibility of the sermon cannot be taken seriously apart from the person of the preacher. Education is another element related to the view of the preacher as authority. Education is a privilege, especially in hierarchical societies where opportunities and access to formal education are more limited. Even in more egalitarian societies, there has been a shift in criteria for hierarchy from the social to the economic. Education is still a factor that signals social class. The gap between the level of education of the preachers and their congregations can result in different ways. In high-power distance cultures, the gap tends to be larger. This can result in higher respect for the preacher as the expert, leading to submission to the preacher's ideas, requests, instructions, or even demands. This can also result on emotional distance from the preacher in groups that distrust authorities. A sort of, the pastor, the preacher, is not one of us. How people see the scriptures and its interpretation are also influenced by power distance. In hierarchical cultures, people's attitudes toward authorities also shape their relationship with the sacred text. There is usually a preferred version or translation, and the biblical interpretation tends to be more literal. Hierarchical societies are in general more traditional. Still, in some contexts, the use of historical critical method is seen with suspicion. What to say about the 20th century hermeneutical shift from text-centered towards readers-centered interpretation? The paradigm shift somehow transferred the authority from the text and the interpreter, preacher, as the one who delivers the word of God, to the authority of the community. Readers-centered interpretation makes sense in more egalitarian societies, which tend to suspect of any external authority, but could be problematic in high-power distance contexts. As you know well, in the 20th century in the Western world there has been a shift in the field of homiletics too, with the emergence of new homiletics with a new emphasis on the audience and an inductive approach. This shift reflects a more egalitarian view of power. Authority is not located in the text in an objective way, but rather in the relationship between the preacher, the text, and the congregation. Preacher and audience are co-creator of the sermonic experience, which becomes less hierarchical and more relevant. This approach contrasts with traditional preaching that is still used in many countries with hierarchical cultures. In my experience traveling and visiting countries in the majority world, I have noticed that in many pulpits, still preachers use the 3-point preaching style with a didactic structure, and preaching is still expository, oriented to the transmission of ideas. But interestingly, there is a contrast in the majority world in the Pentecostal charismatic movement. There are preachers